So today I want to think about pictures and imagery in the Bible. Sometimes literal pictures and sometimes pictures that we get with the words. But to start with, I wanted to think a little bit about actual pictures. So some of you might be familiar, you know the Good News Bible has all those lovely line drawings in it. And we see lots of those, and we're quite used to seeing them in and amongst the text. And so I had a look at where they came from, and they were drawn all in one go by a Swiss artist called Annie Vallotton in the 1960s. And she produced about 500 line drawings that are the ones that we recognise now for the Good News Bible. And she was kind of commissioned to turn the text into something visual. And as we probably know, the Good News Bible, the whole point of that translation was to make the Bible more accessible. And so Annie's drawings did that, but without making them so modern that they don't work now. So they weren't drawn in the style of things that people knew about in the 1960s. They were drawn so that they reflected the things that are written in the Bible, but we still look at them now and they still give us something that we can understand. And it's about kind of highlighting those images, highlighting bits of the text that make them stand out in a way that kind of gives you something else alongside the words to sort of add to it, but without being a distraction. And I wanted to share some of them just so that we can have a look at what some of those images look like. So, Anne, if we could have the first image, please. And hopefully these might be some you recognise. So, this is from Luke, chapter 9, verse 17. You don't have to read the text underneath or be able to, it's fine. You might be able to recognise this as being from the feeding of the 5,000. And so you can kind of see she's got these sort of stick figures. And if you look at it, sort of some of the figures are properly stick figures and some of them look like they've got kind of dresses or the women have got headdresses, but they're very simple and very easy to understand what it is you're looking at. Can we have the next one, please? And so this is from Mark, chapter 8. He must forget himself, carry his cross and follow me. And this is one of those where, when Jesus said that, I don't think he was meaning there would be a whole army of people all carrying crosses. That wasn't kind of the point. But this kind of makes it more visual and makes you sort of have a sense of what that might be like if other people were experiencing the same thing that Jesus did at that time. And the next one, please. Their thoughts have become complete nonsense. Oh, there we go. Thought that might get a chuckle, but it was a bit delayed. It's actually, it's real. I thought this was made up. This is from Romans, and it's about the people are not honouring God, but they're worshipping idols. So that's supposed to be a kind of golden calf. And this was meant to be kind of, instead of them kind of bowing down before God, they're bowing down before this image of a cow. But just that on its own, and the fact that she chose that as one of the ones to illustrate is kind of interesting and slightly amusing to me on its own. Okay, so we'll stick with that one just for a minute. So far, so familiar, apart from possibly that one. And all of these images that we see, we've seen them in the Good News Bible, and they basically pick out some of those things that might be easy to see in pictures. So a number of years ago, 20 years ago in fact, Chris and I were part of the Student Christian Movement, and that organisation produced a publication called Reading the Bible, which was about trying to engage with the text of the Bible a little bit differently and a little bit more broadly and think about what it might have that we might not have seen before, and all the different ways that you could approach what's in the Bible. And one of the things that happened as part of that was one of our friends who was also involved in SCM was commissioned to do some illustrations to go in this publication as a sort of amusing take on the Good News Bible. But for the bits that quite often get left out, sometimes because they're a bit difficult or quite a lot of them a bit gory, and these were produced under the heading of Bad News Bible. So I wanted to share some of those with you. These are also excerpts from the Bible. There's nothing made up, but pictures we wouldn't normally see. So let's have the first one of those, please. His head got caught in the branches. Indeed. So, this is from 2 Samuel, and that man hanging from the branches is Absalom. He's the son of David, and he's in the middle of a battle between David's men and the Israelites, and he's going under a tree on a mule, and his head gets stuck in the branches and the mule runs off. And he was left hanging in midair. Don't often see that one preached about in the lectionary, I have to say. Number 2, please. But a woman threw a millstone down on his head, and she did. This man is Abimelech, who killed his 70 brothers and became king. And this woman threw this millstone down on his head because he'd been disloyal. But he clearly didn't get fatally injured by the millstone landing on his head. I don't know why. But he didn't want everyone to say Abimelech was killed by a woman, so he asked the man carrying his sword to run him through and kill him instead. And fair play to him, he did. Bad News Bible indeed. Next one, please. I do not allow a woman to speak. Sorry. I might have picked this one just because I was standing up here preaching about it. 1 Timothy. In this passage, women are being talked about as being responsible for Adam's downfall via Eve, and therefore they're not allowed to be involved in any positions of leadership. And actually, women will only be saved by having children. Never mind. Bad News Bible. Right. Last one, please. Your breasts are like twin gazelles. Aside from looking a little bit painful, this is from Song of Songs, which we're going to hear from in a little bit. And this was that was the inspiration for me starting to look at these images and everything, because I remembered there being this image in this publication that was from Song of Songs. So every time I hear the Song of Songs, I think about the twin gazelles. And the whole of Song of Songs is a declaration of love and a declaration by the writer of his love's beauty. And so this is one of the ways of illustrating that, which kind of makes you realize that some of the poetry in the Bible might not always be meant to be taken literally. But in all seriousness, some of these images, both the ones that are actually in the Bible and the not so orthodox ones, can help us understand the things we're reading or maybe see things in a new way. And sometimes they're useful to remind us of the bits that we forget or that we'd like to leave out. There's another one in there that says, drink, get drunk and vomit. And I don't know where that is from. I haven't looked it up, but I thought that I would probably need to just filter it down and only have a selection. But there are lots of things in there that we don't often read about, certainly don't come up in the lectionary. So I wonder, what are the bits that you would like to see illustrated? What are the passages in the Bible that you'd like to see a Good News Bible illustration for? And what are the bits that maybe we'd rather not? We're now going to hear our first reading for the day, which is from
Matthew chapter 11, verses 16 to 19 and 25 to 30. What can I say about the people of this time? What are they like? They are like children sitting in a marketplace who call out to each other. We played music for you, but you did not dance. We sang a sad song, but you did not cry. John came and did not eat or drink like the other people. So people say he has a demon. The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and people say, look at him, he eats too much and drinks too much wine, and he is a friend of tax collectors and sinners. But wisdom is proved to be right and by what she does. At that time, Jesus said, I praise you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, because you have hidden these things from people who are wise and smart, but you have shown them to those who are like little children. Yes, Father, this is what you really wanted. My Father has given me all things. No one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son, and those whom the Son chooses to tell. Come to me, all of you who are tired and have heavy loads. I will give you rest. Accept my teachings and learn from me, because I am gentle and humble in spirit, and you will find rest for your lives. The burden that I asked you to accept is easy. The load I give you is carry is light.
The second reading is from the Song of Solomon, the second Song of Solomon, and coincidentally I'm reading from the Good News Bible with the sketches, and the little sketch you probably can't see for this one is about a man and a woman. So, the woman. I hear my lover's voice. He comes running over the mountains, racing across the hills to me. My lover is like a gazelle, like a young stag. There he stands by the wall. He looks in through the window and glances through the lattice. My lover speaks to me. The man. Come then, my love, my darling, come with me. The winter is over. The rains have stopped. Inside, in the countryside, the flowers are in bloom. This is the time for singing. The song of doves is heard in the fields. Figs are beginning to ripen. The air is fragrant with blossoming vines. Come then, my love, my darling, come with me. Amen.
So it's probably not a surprise that the Bible is full of poems and symbols. The readings that we heard today are just two of those. And it's not always easy, is it, to know what to make of these passages and how to read them. So this sermon isn't so much about the content of those readings themselves, but about how they're written, and using that to think about poetry in the Bible and how we read it. Sometimes we come across passages that just seem like a bit of a mystery, and we don't know how to interpret them. I read a quote when I was preparing this from a preacher who said, "I would happily read a psalm to people in hospital, but I wouldn't consider preaching on one because I don't know what to do with it." And it can feel a bit like that with poetic writing because it doesn't seem to have really a clear meaning, quite often a clear reason behind it. We know where we are with prose, with conversations, descriptions of places and events. But if we avoid all the figurative, more poetic writing in the Bible, then we lose a lot of it. So today I have three questions. What do we find in these passages? How should we approach them and read them? And why is it important that we read them at all? So, probably around 1/3 of the Bible is poetry. Pretty much all of Psalms, Proverbs, Song of Songs or Song of Solomon and Job. And then books like Ecclesiastes and Revelation are in poetic prose. Jesus also uses a lot of poetic language in his conversations with people, like we heard in today's Gospel reading. And there are so many metaphors and figurative speech throughout the Bible. Things like the opening chapter of John, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." Or things like, "You are the salt of the earth, but if salt has lost its taste, how can its saltiness be restored?" Salt and light. And the first bit of the Matthew reading that Isabel read for us is a classic example of Jesus using metaphors to make his point. In the version that I was reading it from, "But to what will I compare this generation? It's like children sitting in the marketplaces and calling to one another, 'We played the flute for you and you didn't dance. We wailed and you did not mourn.'" That on its own might not be that clear about what it's trying to get across. But then Jesus follows it with a kind of real life version, talking about people's different reactions to himself and to John the Baptist. They behaved and acted and lived very differently, but people still found fault with both of them, which is perhaps not surprising, or even unique to that time period particularly. Sound familiar about people in the public eye today? The story about children calling to each other in the marketplace becomes clearer when we hear the real example. People are fickle, basically. We easily change our minds and expectations, reject one thing and then later reject the complete opposite. And Jesus is using that metaphor to tell people what this looks like. Rather than just saying, look, people are fickle. They didn't like John and now they don't like me, when I do the opposite of what he did. Instead of that, he uses this kind of mini story. And then the second part of the reading is different again. There's a gap in the middle, so it sort of skips further down. And then Jesus finishes that with these lines that we might find quite familiar. Come to me, you who are weary and carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. And yet I'm not really sure that's meant to be taken literally either. I'm never quite sure how this bit fits alongside Jesus saying, whoever wants to follow me must pick up their cross. Those two, again, seem completely contradictory. So perhaps here, as with many other times, he's not really talking literally, but that this is another metaphor for how it will feel when we choose to follow, rather than just, we're going to have an easy life now. And then we have Song of Songs, Song of Solomon. The whole book is one poem. And we don't hear it read in church a lot. In fact, this is the only time it appears in the 3-year cycle of the lectionary. And it's probably not surprising that this is only the only bit that gets included. But aside from the interesting subject matter, it's a book full of metaphors and symbols. This reading has the narrator waiting for their love to return, thinking about their relationship and the love that they have for each other. And when you interpret this particular passage, we see that this relationship is a symbol of the relationship that God wants to have with us and the love that God has for us. And there are other symbols in here as well, like the reference to the voice of the dove, which echoes the dove in Genesis when the flood is over and God's relationship with humanity is renewed. And it's this reading that started me off thinking about poetry and symbols in the Bible. Because when I look at a reading like this and think, this doesn't make sense, what on earth do I say about that? Sometimes I just think about why that is, instead of thinking about the reading itself. So, if there is all this poetry and imagery in the Bible, then it's another of the ways that God is communicating with us. So it's important that we read it, engage with it, and keep trying to learn from it. Excuse me. And so the next part of the sermon is, how do we do that? Well, I think the first thing that we've probably all been told about reading poetry is to read it slowly, to take time to absorb it and understand the different meanings in it. The first time we read a passage, we might see the story on the surface, the first layer, the children in the marketplace. Then we read it again, we reflect on it, we think about what it means, and we might see something deeper. It's kind of the opposite of speed reading. Rather than skimming the surface and getting a general idea, when we really take time to notice the figures of speech and the images within it, when we unpack the meaning of each of these bits of the text, we find out more and more. I think it's one of the nice things about the lectionary and having the readings that come round again and again. We hear things once and we think we've worked out what they mean. And then the next time we hear it differently, see things in it that we didn't see last time, hear somebody else preach on it. We're always listening from our present, from today's thoughts and experiences, so next time we might hear it very differently. And with poetic writing, there are so many more things that we can discover and that can change how we see ourselves, the world, and God. And the other thing is that reading these poetic passages means we have to have an open mind. We can't just go in assuming that we think we know what they're about. Often with stories and descriptive writing, we get used to knowing what they mean. We've heard them so many times and we know what the right answer is. We can explain it. And then it means it's difficult to see anything else because we already know what the answer is. But poetry and more figurative passages force us to think again each time we hear them. They don't have one defined explanation, one specific meaning. They're more fluid. They move and grow and show us new things each time we read them. And this makes me think of music, which is essentially like singing poetry, where words and images flow and change constantly. And because of that distinctly Methodist tradition of singing our faith, music and song is such an important part of how we understand and express our faith. And that's how I chose our hymns for today. At first glance, they might not look like they fit a specific theme, but they're hymns which are rich in images and symbols and which add more depth to our understanding of God. The Lord's My Shepherd, based on Psalm 23, uses all of those natural images to describe how God cares for and protects us. He leads me by the still, still waters, and he anoints my head with oil. And you might notice that we're going to have 2 different songs about dance. We already had Teach Me to Dance. And that song isn't just about words of us moving in the power of God's Spirit. There's also a sort of rhythm and movement to the music. The tempo of the song and the bounce of the tune. It feels like the song itself is moving. And this is what I think these poems are, whether read or sung. They're alive and moving and growing. The song we're going to sing in a few moments is The Lord of the Dance, a song I've known since I was a very young child by the wonderful Sydney Carter. And there's so much poetry in that song, I can't describe it all. I'd be here all day. But I will let you notice those things yourselves as you sing it shortly. But Sydney Carter talks about music and song being like a dance, something that's living and moving and growing. He describes a lot of his songs as carols, not because they're about Christmas, but because a carol is a dance before it's a song, before it's written down and put into a hymn book. When we write it down, the music is fixed. We have the notation, we have the words, they're all there in black and white. It becomes fixed and static and it stops moving. But to keep them as carols, as dances, allows the tunes and words to continue to change and flow and develop, and we continue to learn more from them. And this takes us into the final part of this sermon, which is to ask why it's important to read these bits of the Bible. Why do we need to engage with them instead of just sticking to the easy bits? Because when we listen to the poetry and reflect on the imagery in these passages, we experience that dance. The movement of the stories, which are not fixed and finished, but are still living and growing. Wouldn't it be sad if the word of God in the Bible was done and complete, and there was nothing else to say? If God wasn't speaking to us anymore, because God has already said everything? I don't think that's the case. When we read these poems, metaphors, and look at the images, we get a richer understanding of God and the messages that God has given to people and is still giving now. We find a greater range of emotions expressed, and we can see that people can be joyful and hopeful in God, but also scared, uncertain, and sometimes downright angry. When we find all of this in the Bible, it reminds us that it's okay to feel those things ourselves and to share those emotions with God. Overall, exploring that kind of poetic side of the Bible might not be straightforward. It takes time, and there won't necessarily be obvious meanings or straight answers to any of it. But it can enrich our understanding of God and remind us that our faith isn't static, but living and changing all the time. Another theme of Sydney Carter's songs is the journey, that we're always moving and travelling, most famously in One More Step Along the World I Go. It's from the old I travel to the new, keep me travelling along with you. It reminds me that our faith is a journey with God. We're always growing and always learning new things. So the next time you're faced with a Bible passage that seems to be written in riddles, give it a chance. Take your time, read it a few times, and don't assume you have to understand it all immediately. Let it grow, let it speak, let it dance. Amen.